My father snatched the keys from my hand, right in front of the house I had just bought with my own blood and tears. His voice was as cold as the Atlantic ice. "Don't get too excited, Glory. You're not staying here. This house is for Kyle. Your duty is to serve your country, and now it's time to serve your family. My name is Glory Hatch. I'm 33 years old, a petty officer in the United States Coast Guard. For 12 of those years, my home has been the rolling deck of a cutter on the unforgiving waters of the Pacific. But today, for the first time, I had a real home. And today, I was showing that home to my family, my father, Robert, my mother, Nancy, and my younger brother, Kyle, who at 29 still seemed to carry the perpetual air of a teenager waiting for his life to start. The little timber-framed house in Astoria, Oregon, was everything I had ever allowed myself to dream of during those long, cold nights at sea. It smelled of fresh paint, cedar, and the rich, creamy clam chowder I had simmering on the stove, a local recipe I was determined to master. I'd even bought a 6-pack of Fort George IPA, a craft beer from down the street, to celebrate. This was it. This was the anchor I had finally dropped for myself. "And this," I said, my voice brimming with a pride so pure it felt like a physical warmth in my chest, "is where I'm going to plant the Oregon rhododendrons. Right by the window, so they catch the morning sun." I gestured towards the small patch of yard overlooking the majestic mouth of the Columbia River. I could already picture the vibrant pink and purple blooms against the backdrop of the gray Oregon mist. I turned to them, my smile wide and genuine, expecting to see a reflection of my own joy, but I saw none. My mother, Nancy, was running a finger over the new kitchen countertop, her eyes scanning the room with a detached, appraising glance. My father, Robert, stood with his arms crossed, his gaze fixed not on the view, but on my brother, Kyle. They were whispering, their heads close together, their eyes holding a glint of calculation that sent a sudden, inexplicable chill down my spine. They hadn't heard a word I'd said. The dream I had been painting for them with my words had vanished into the air, unnoticed. My father cleared his throat, stepping forward and breaking their hushed conference. He ignored my gesture towards the garden, ignored the pot of chowder, ignored the very soul of the house I was pouring out for them. "This is a good house," Robert said. His voice was flat, devoid of any emotion, like an officer giving a field report. "It'll be a good start for Kyle. The boy needs stability." The words hit me with the force of a rogue wave. I stood there, speechless, the smile freezing on my lips. My heart, which had been soaring moments before, felt like it had been seized in an icy grip. For Kyle? My mother, ever the smooth diplomat in our family's cold wars, rushed to my side. She placed a hand on my arm, her touch meant to be soothing, but feeling like a brand. "You've always been the strong one, Glory," she cooed, her voice a soft, manipulative melody. "You can stay on base. It's comfortable there. Your brother, he needs this more than you do. Think of the family. Think of the family." The phrase that had been the justification for every sacrifice I had ever made. Kyle, emboldened by their united front, sauntered into the room I had mentally designated as my study. He smirked, that familiar entitled expression on his face. "Yeah, this'll make a great gaming room. I can fit a big screen TV right on that wall." Something inside me snapped. The quiet professionalism I'd been trained to maintain, the habit of swallowing my own needs for the greater good, it all fractured. A tremor started in my hands. "This is my house," I managed to say, my voice trembling, betraying the storm raging inside me. I saved for 12 years of service to get this house. My father's expression hardened. He took 2 long strides towards me, his shadow falling over me like a shroud. He didn't say a word. Instead, he reached out and snatched the set of keys from my hand. The metallic jangle of the keys hitting each other was a sharp, ugly sound in the sudden silence of the room, a sound of violation. "Don't get ahead of yourself, Glory," he said, his voice as cold and unforgiving as the North Atlantic. "You're not staying here. This house is for Kyle. Your duty is to serve your country. Now it's time you served your family." He tossed a thick manila envelope onto the polished oak countertop I had chosen with such care. It landed with a heavy, final thud. "That's from our lawyer," he said, turning to leave. "We'll see you in court." And just like that, they were gone. The front door clicked shut, leaving behind a silence that was more deafening than any storm I had ever weathered at sea. The rich aroma of the clam chowder, now cooling on the stove, seemed to mock me. The house, my dream, my sanctuary, suddenly felt like a tomb. I stood alone in the middle of the living room, my hands shaking uncontrollably. I walked to the window and stared out at the fine, persistent Oregon drizzle that had begun to fall, the sky weeping the tears I couldn't shed. The entire foundation of my world, the very definition of my life's work, had been ripped out from under me. All the lonely nights, the missed holidays, the dangerous rescues, the years of disciplined saving, all of it reduced to nothing more than a down payment on my brother's gaming room. A single agonizing thought burned through the shock. How did love turn into such a cruel contract? Since when did my sacrifice become an invisible debt? I have to pay for the rest of my life. The questions from the night before echoed in the hollow space of the house, hanging in the damp Oregon air like ghosts. How did love turn into a contract? When did my sacrifice become a debt? I sat on the cold, hardwood floor, the lawyer's manila envelope lying on the counter like a verdict already delivered. The truth was, this storm hadn't appeared out of nowhere. It had been gathering for years, a slow, dark accumulation of clouds I had dutifully ignored. My father's cruelty, my mother's manipulations, Kyle's bottomless pit of need. This wasn't a single sudden squall. It was the climate I had grown up in. The betrayal didn't start yesterday. It started so long ago that its roots were tangled up with my earliest memories, forming a private museum of scars I rarely allowed myself to visit. But now, sitting in the ruins of my greatest achievement, I unlocked the doors. The first exhibit was a high school football stadium in Ohio, 15 years ago. I was 18, standing on a makeshift stage in a royal blue cap and gown, the gold cords of the valedictorian heavy on my shoulders. I clutched the pages of my speech, the ink slightly blurred from my nervous, sweaty palms. I was about to speak of the future, of promise, of the world waiting for us. But as I looked out at the sea of faces, my eyes searched for one small section of the bleachers and found it empty. My phone had buzzed just minutes before the procession began. It was my mother, her voice a frantic whisper. "Glory, honey, we can't make it. Kyle's gotten into some trouble again." Some trouble, I later found out, was that he had crashed his car while driving drunk. A minor accident, no one was hurt, but it was enough. It was always enough. Kyle's small troubles always outweighed my biggest triumphs. So I stood on that stage, under the bright, unforgiving lights, and delivered a speech about bright futures to a crowd that included the empty seats of my own family. I saw the pity in the eyes of my friends' parents, in the gentle, sad smile of my principal. And I learned a core lesson of my existence. My achievements were conditional, always subject to cancellation by my brother's failures. The next memory was warmer, at least at first. It smelled of roast turkey and cinnamon. I was a few years older, home for a rare 72-hour leave for Thanksgiving. I had flown over 3,000 miles, crossing a continent, carrying carefully chosen little gifts from the ports I'd visited. Carved wooden figures, colorful woven scarves. I was desperate for the feeling of home, for the simple comfort of a family meal. But the conversation around the dinner table never drifted my way. My stories, the ones I'd saved up, about rescuing a fishing crew in a terrifying storm off the Alaskan coast, were met with distracted nods. My father was too busy grilling my mother about Kyle's latest firing, his 5th job in 2 years. "Those things you do, they're too dangerous," my mother said, finally turning to me, but only to dismiss my reality. She patted my hand, her touch meant to be comforting, but only highlighting the chasm between us. "But you're set, Glory. You have a pension to look forward to. Your brother, he has nothing." The perfectly roasted turkey suddenly tasted like ash in my mouth. I, the one who faced down death, was merely set. My life, my risks, my service, all of it was just a stable, uninteresting fact, a resource to be counted on. Kyle, the one who couldn't hold a job, was the project. He was the crisis. He was the one who mattered. I was just the strong one, the reliable one, the invisible one. But the final exhibit in my museum was the most damning. It wasn't public, like the graduation, or quietly dismissive, like Thanksgiving. It was a secret, a transaction. I was 21, on my first real deployment, and had just received my first installment of hazard pay. It felt like blood money, earned by sailing into places others were fleeing from. The same day the money hit my account, my mother called. She was weeping, a torrent of calculated sobs and pleas. Kyle was in deep, she explained, a gambling debt, a dangerous one. "I just need to borrow it, honey," she begged, her voice cracking. "Just this once. I'll tell your father. We'll pay you back as soon as we can. Please, Glory. They'll hurt him." Out of love, out of fear, out of a lifetime of conditioning to be the family's designated fixer, I wired her almost every dollar. She never mentioned it again. The money, the promise, the debt, it all vanished. It was in that moment, staring at my near-empty bank account from a world away, that I understood my true role. I wasn't a daughter. I was the contingency plan. I was the emergency fund. I was the backup, the safety net woven from my own sacrifice, always ready to be deployed, to save my brother from the consequences of his own choices. Back in the present, the cold of the floor seeped into my bones. These memories were no longer just sources of a dull, chronic ache. They were evidence. They were the bricks, laid one by one over the years, that had built the wall that now stood between my family and me. The scene from yesterday wasn't an aberration, it was a culmination. I looked at the legal papers on the counter, the thick envelope my father had thrown down. It was a declaration of war, but a war they had been waging against me in secret for my entire life. And for the first time, a new question rose above the pain, clear and sharp as a ship's bell in the fog. Will I continue to be their backup plan, or will I finally become the main plan for my own life? The question I had asked myself in the dark hung in the gray light of dawn. Will I become the main plan for my own life? Answering it felt like plotting a course through an uncharted, storm-tossed sea. It was terrifying. For a lifetime, my role had been to be the steady, reliable ship for everyone else's turbulent waters, to steer my own vessel, to claim my own heading, the thought left me feeling overwhelmed and utterly alone. Sleep never came that night. Instead, I lay awake, the ghosts of past injustices parading through my mind. By the time the first light filtered through the window, a cold, hard resolve had settled in my gut. Answering the question wasn't a matter of feeling ready, it was a matter of survival. I got out of bed, my movements stiff, and went to my laptop. The screen's glow felt harsh in the dim room. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, hesitating. What do you even do when your own family declares war on you? I typed the only words that came to mind into the search bar. Real estate lawyer Astoria. A list of names and firms populated the screen, a sterile collection of options for a deeply personal wound. My eyes scanned them, but one listing snagged my attention. It wasn't the biggest firm or the flashiest website. It was the tagline under the name Sarah Campbell Esquero, specializing in family and property disputes. Family and property disputes. The phrase was a clinical, legal definition for the wreckage of my life. I stared at it, my heart hammering against my ribs. Making this call felt like stepping off a cliff, and then a quote I'd seen online from Brené Brown surfaced in my mind. Vulnerability is not winning or losing. It's having the courage to show up and be seen when we have no control over the outcome. I had no control over what my family had done or what they would do next. I couldn't control the outcome of a legal battle, but I could control this. I could choose to show up. I took a deep, shuddering breath, picked up my phone, and dialed the number. My voice was barely a whisper when a calm receptionist answered, but I managed to schedule an appointment for that afternoon. My hand was still trembling when I hung up. Sarah Campbell's office was in one of Astoria's historic downtown buildings, the kind with tall windows that looked out over the water. Through the glass, the colossal steel frame of the Astoria-Megler Bridge stretched across the Columbia River, its far end disappearing into the thick coastal fog. It was a perfect symbol for how I felt. Trying to cross an impossible distance with no clear view of the other side. The office itself was not lavish, but it was professional and warm, filled with books and the quiet hum of competence. Sarah Campbell was a woman in her 40s, with sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing, but a voice that held a surprising amount of empathy. She gestured for me to sit, and as I did, I braced myself for the interrogation, for the skepticism, but it never came. She listened. She simply listened as the whole story tumbled out of me, the house, the keys, the years of being the family's backup plan. I told her about the missed graduation, the tasteless Thanksgiving dinner, the secret loan that was never repaid. I laid out the contents of my museum of scars on the polished surface of her desk. Through it all, she remained silent, her focus absolute. She didn't interrupt, didn't take copious notes, just nodded occasionally, her unwavering gaze making me feel, for the first time, truly seen. When I finally finished, the silence in the room felt heavy with the weight of my life story. I held my breath, preparing myself for the inevitable questions, the subtle doubt, the suggestion that perhaps I had misunderstood. Instead, Sarah leaned forward slightly and spoke, her voice calm and clear. "Ms. Hatch," she said, and the simple professional title was a balm to my raw nerves. "What you have endured is not family obligation. It is financial exploitation and emotional abuse. And yes, it is absolutely actionable." The words struck me with the force of a revelation. Exploitation, abuse. She had given my pain a name, a real, legal, legitimate name. It wasn't just in my head. I wasn't being dramatic. I wasn't crazy. A wave of relief so profound washed over me that I felt the tight knot of tension I'd been carrying for days, for years, finally begin to loosen. I could breathe. For the first time since my father had snatched the keys from my hand, I could draw a full, deep breath. Sarah began to outline the next steps, talking about discovery, evidence gathering, and legal strategies. Her voice was the sound of competence, of a path forward. "They fired the first shot, Glory," she said, her tone shifting from empathetic listener to determined advocate. "Now it's our turn to build our defense, a defense as solid and unwavering as that lighthouse out there." She nodded towards the window. I followed her gaze. In the distance, across the gray water, I could just make out the stoic white tower of the Cape Disappointment Lighthouse, a beacon of resilience against the endless fog and relentless sea. It had stood there for over a century, guiding ships through the most treacherous waters. A lighthouse in the fog, a surge of strength, clear and bright, cut through my own internal fog. I turned back to Sarah, my resolve hardening into something solid, something real. She slid a retainer agreement across the desk. I picked up the pen, and for the first time, my hand was perfectly steady. Signing the retainer with Sarah Campbell felt like taking the first offensive shot in a war I never wanted. Walking out of her office, the fog over the Columbia River seemed a little less dense, the lighthouse a little brighter. But back on the deck of the cutter the next day, the familiar scent of salt and diesel fuel did little to calm the turmoil in my mind. Every task, from routine engine checks to reviewing navigational charts, felt monumental. My focus was shot. The legal battle ahead was a vast, unknown territory, and the thought of facing my family in court churned a sea of anxiety in my stomach. I was going through the motions, but my mind was a million miles away, lost in a fog of what-ifs. I must have been more transparent than I thought. "Hatch, my office." The voice of Commander Williams, my CO, cut through my daze. He was a man of few words, a classic Navy man whose quiet demeanor belied a sharp, observant mind. In his office, he didn't ask me to sit. He just stood by his desk, looking at me with an expression that wasn't pity, but a kind of professional assessment. "I don't know what's going on, Hatch," he said, his voice low and even. "And it's not my business to ask, but I can see it's affecting your work. Whatever it is, it's heavy." He slid a piece of paper across his desk. "I've signed off on a week of emergency leave for you. Go take care of your business." I was stunned into silence. In the Coast Guard, you're expected to compartmentalize, to leave your personal problems on the shore. This act of quiet, unconditional support from my commanding officer was so unexpected, it nearly brought tears to my eyes. "Thank you, Commander," I managed to say, my voice thick with gratitude. He just gave a short, sharp nod. "We're a team, Hatch. We look out for our own." That evening, the weight of his words still settling in my heart, I met my best friend and shipmate, Maria Hernandez, at a local dive bar called the Salty Siren. It was our usual spot, a place filled with the loud laughter of fishermen and other coasties, the smell of fried fish, and the comforting bitterness of good local beer. We found a booth in the corner, and over baskets of fish and chips and pints of Fort George IPA, I told her everything. The whole sordid story came pouring out. The house, the keys, my father's cold pronouncement, my mother's manipulative tears, the lawyer, the lawsuit. My voice cracked and wavered, lost in the telling. Maria didn't say much. She didn't offer easy platitudes or tell me what I should do. She just listened, her dark eyes filled with a fierce, protective anger on my behalf. When I finished, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand, her grip firm and grounding. "They don't deserve you, Glory," she said, her voice low but certain, cutting through the noise of the bar. "You're the best person I know. Don't you dare let them define your worth." Her simple, unwavering belief in me was a lifeline. Later, she wouldn't let me go back to my empty, contested house. "You're staying with me tonight," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. She pulled me out of the bar and back to her small, cozy apartment a few blocks away. It wasn't much, but it was filled with life. Plants in the windows, colorful posters on the walls, a stack of well-loved books on the coffee table. She didn't make a fuss. She just cooked a simple dinner of spaghetti with a jarred tomato sauce and a pre-made salad, and opened a cheap bottle of red wine. We curled up on her worn-out sofa and put on an old, stupid comedy on Netflix, the kind you've seen a dozen times. Lying there, wrapped in a blanket, listening to my best friend's easy laughter beside me, a profound sense of peace washed over me. The knot of anxiety in my chest finally, truly began to unwind. This, I realized with a pang in my heart, was what a home was supposed to feel like. Safe, unconditional. The feeling lasted through the night and into the next morning. I woke up on her couch to the smell of fresh coffee. We were sitting at her small kitchen table, mugs in hand, the morning light streaming in, when the peace was shattered. My phone, sitting on the table between us, buzzed violently against the wood. The screen lit up with a name I dreaded, Mom. A text message appeared. I stared at it, my blood running cold. "Glory, where are you? Why aren't you answering your phone? Your father is furious. You are making everything so much worse." The warmth of the morning, the coffee, the friendship, it all evaporated in an instant. The air grew thin and cold, the familiar chill of their control reaching me even here, in this safe harbor. The shadow of my family was long, and it had found me again. The text message from my mother was a declaration of a new strategy. The initial shock and awe tactic hadn't worked, so now it was time for the siege. My phone began to buzz incessantly with calls and a barrage of texts, each one a carefully crafted missile of guilt and obligation. After 2 days of ignoring the assault, I finally answered, my voice flat and tired. She didn't yell. That wasn't her style. Her voice was laced with a fragile, wounded tone. "She wanted to talk," she said. "Just the two of us. No lawyers, no anger." She suggested a place, a small riverside cafe in Astoria we used to go to for hot chocolate when I was a little girl. The choice was deliberate, a weaponized piece of nostalgia. Against my better judgment, and perhaps fueled by the last dying ember of hope that I was wrong about everything, I agreed. And when I arrived, she was already there, seated at a small table by the window. A half-finished latte sat in front of her, but my eyes were immediately drawn to the other items she had carefully arranged on the table like a stage set, a small stack of old family photographs. There I was at age 10, grinning with a missing front tooth. There was our family on a vacation to Yellowstone. Kyle perched on my father's shoulders. They were relics from a time I remembered as happy, now being used as instruments of emotional blackmail. "I miss these days," she began, her voice thick with a practiced wistfulness as I sat down. She pushed a photo towards me. We were a family then. I remained silent, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. This was the opening act of a play I knew all too well. And then, right on cue, the tears began to well in her eyes. They weren't the dramatic sobs of genuine grief, but the slow, glistening tears of a seasoned performer. She started her monologue, a masterpiece of victimhood. My father, she lamented, was just too stubborn, too proud. Kyle was just a foolish boy who'd made mistakes, and she, of course, was caught in the middle, her heart breaking for her fractured family. "I know what your father did was wrong, Glory," she whispered, leaning forward and covering my hand with hers. Her skin was cold. "But I was just trying to keep this family together. That's all I've ever wanted." Her eyes, shimmering with moisture, pleaded with me. "You're the only one who can fix this, honey. You've always been the strong one. Please just drop the lawsuit. For me, for the family. I'm begging you." For a split second, a flicker of the old conditioning, the deeply ingrained need to soothe her, to be the peacemaker, stirred within me. I looked at her tear-streaked face, at the photos of a smiling past, and my resolve wavered. Seeing my silence, she mistook it for surrender. And so, she played her final card. "The thing is," she continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "there's a bigger problem. Kyle is in some serious trouble. He owes a lot of money." A cold dread, sharp and familiar, pierced through my momentary weakness. I knew what was coming. "If you would just agree to co-sign on the house," she said, her grip on my hand tightening, "we could use it as collateral. Just a small loan to get him back on his feet. He'll pay you back, Glory, I promise, as soon as he's stable." And there it was, the poison pill wrapped in a sugar coating of love and nostalgia. It wasn't about family. It was never about family. It was about a bailout. My house, my 12 years of service, was not to be a home for my brother, but a line of credit. The audacity of it, the sheer naked greed disguised as a mother's plea, was like a bucket of ice water to the face. It extinguished the last ember of hope, leaving nothing but cold, hard ash. The performance was over. Slowly, deliberately, I pulled my hand from beneath hers. The warmth from her skin was gone, replaced by a profound chill. I looked up, and for the first time in my life, I met my mother's gaze without a trace of fear or hope or the desperate need for her approval. I saw her not as my mother, but as the architect of my pain. "No," I said. The word was quiet, but it filled the space between us with an unshakable finality. Her eyes widened, the tears instantly forgotten. "I will not be dropping the lawsuit," I continued, my voice steady and cold. "And I will not be signing anything." I pushed my chair back from the table, the legs scraping softly against the floor. "Your show is over, Mom." I stood up, leaving her there, speechless amidst her props of a happy past, the staged photographs and the cooling latte. I didn't look back as I walked out of the cafe and into the crisp Oregon air. The fog had lifted, and for the first time, the path ahead seemed brutally, terrifyingly clear. I knew exactly what I had to do next. When I walked back into Maria's apartment, the fragile peace of the morning was a distant memory. The grief, the hurt, the confusion, all of it had been burned away in the cold fire of my mother's final desperate lie. What was left was something new. It was a calm, chilling anger, an anger so pure and so focused, it felt like a weapon being forged in my soul. There were no more tears. I didn't collapse onto the sofa. Instead, I began to pace the small living room, back and forth, a caged animal whose cage had just dissolved. The pent-up energy of a lifetime of being the strong one, of absorbing every slight, every injustice, was coiling inside me like a spring wound too tight. I remembered every broken promise, every dismissed achievement, every dollar I had sacrificed on the altar of their dysfunction. And I remembered the oath I took when I joined the Coast Guard, an oath to support and defend the Constitution. But what about the Constitution of my own life? Who was going to defend that? Enough, I whispered to the empty room, the words of vow. More than enough. The time for silent endurance was over. The hunt had begun. I sat down at Maria's kitchen table and opened my laptop. The muscle memory of my training took over. With the meticulous precision of a soldier preparing for a mission, I created a new encrypted file on a secure drive. I named it Operation Anchor. This was my war now, and it would be fought with strategy and evidence. For hours, I dug through the digital archaeology of my life. I sifted through years of old emails, text messages, and cloud-stored documents. I cross-referenced dates and times. I became an investigator in my own history, searching for the paper trail of their betrayals. And I found it. Deep in the archives of my bank statements from 12 years ago, there it was. A wire transfer for nearly $4,000, sent to my mother's account. The date matched perfectly with the week she had called me, crying about Kyle's gambling debt. It was the hazard pay from my first deployment, hard proof. I saved a PDF of the statement, Exhibit A. I documented every manipulative text message from the past few weeks, Exhibit B. I even made a few calls to distant relatives, an aunt in Florida, a cousin in Texas. I didn't ask for support or complain about my parents. I was on an intelligence-gathering mission. I asked casual questions about how they were doing, about Kyle, listening carefully to the version of the story my parents had surely spun for them. I took detailed notes, potential witnesses. The victim was gone. In her place was a petty officer with a mission. Each piece of evidence was another round of ammunition. Each documented lie was another fortification in my defense. When I had gathered a preliminary arsenal, I picked up the phone and called Sarah Campbell. There was no hesitation in my fingers as I dialed, no tremor in my voice when she answered. "Sarah, it's Glory Hatch." "Glory, I was hoping to hear from you. How are you holding up?" "I'm done holding up," I said, my voice clear and steady. "I'm ready to fight back. I want to countersue. I want to sue for repayment of a personal loan I made to my mother for my brother's debt 12 years ago. And I want a restraining order." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line, and then I heard Sarah let out a low, satisfied chuckle. "I've been waiting for this call, Glory," she said, her voice humming with professional excitement. "This changes the game. Send me everything you have. The real battle begins now." After we hung up, I felt a profound shift inside me. The anger was still there, but it was no longer a hot, chaotic emotion. It was cold, controlled fuel. It was power. Have you ever had a moment like that? A moment where the fear is finally burned away by the fire of your own resolve, when you realize you are done being silent. That night, I didn't sleep. I worked. Maria's small living room was no longer a sanctuary. It had become a command center. I went out and bought a large corkboard from an office supply store and mounted it on the wall. With a box of pushpins and a stack of index cards, I began to build my warboard. I mapped out a timeline, pinning cards with dates of key events. The wire transfer, the house closing, the disastrous housewarming, the meeting at the cafe. I printed out the bank statements and the manipulative text messages, pinning them to the board as hard evidence. I drew a flowchart with colored markers, diagramming the flow of money from my hazard pay to my mother's account to presumably Kyle's bookie. I listed potential witnesses and what they might corroborate. This was no longer just about a house. This was about reclaiming a life. The four walls around me were no longer just a temporary shelter. They were the headquarters for Operation Anchor, and I was its commanding officer. The next morning, I carefully transported my corkboard command center to Sarah Campbell's office. We propped it up against a wall of law books, a strange, chaotic map of my life now on display in this world of quiet, ordered professionalism. The contrast was stark, but it felt right. This was no longer just my pain, it was our case. Sarah stood before the board, her arms crossed, her sharp gaze taking in every note and connection I had made. She was like a seasoned general reviewing a battlefield map. "This is good, Glory," she said, tapping a finger on the printout of the wire transfer. "The countersuit for the 12-year-old loan is solid. It establishes a pattern of financial expectation on their part. But their case against you for the house, it's flimsy based on emotion." She paced in front of the board. "Their entire argument will be built on two things: an alleged verbal agreement and the concept of family duty. Both are incredibly hard to prove in court. But a jury can be swayed by a story of a struggling son and a desperate family. We can't just defend, we need to attack their motive." She stopped and turned to me, her eyes locking onto mine. "The question isn't just what they're doing, it's why. Why do they need this house so badly right now?" That single question became the new heading for our entire operation. It was the key we were missing. Their desperation felt too acute, too sudden. There had to be something else going on beneath the surface. "We need to dig," Sarah said. "Think, Glory. Is there anyone at all, who might have a piece of the puzzle, even if they don't know it?" My mind raced through a list of distant relatives, people on the periphery of our family drama. One name surfaced: my cousin, Amy. We weren't close, but we were friendly. She was my father's niece, and she still lived back in Ohio. I felt a knot of anxiety tighten in my stomach at the thought of calling her, of potentially poisoning her against my parents. But this was a war. That afternoon, I sat in a quiet corner of Sarah's office and made the call. I tried to keep my voice casual, asking about her kids, her job. She was guarded at first, clearly having heard my parents' side of the story. I could hear the skepticism in her voice. So I didn't argue. I just told her my truth, simply and without embellishment. I told her about the house, the keys, the lawsuit. As she listened, I felt the ice in her voice begin to thaw, replaced by a hesitant sympathy. And then she said something that made the hair on my arms stand up. "It's funny," Amy said, thinking aloud. "The last time I talked to Aunt Nancy, Uncle Robert was in the background, sounding really stressed. He kept going on about doing whatever it takes to keep the family house from being lost." The words hung in the air. Keep the family house from being lost. That didn't make any sense. They weren't losing their house. They were trying to take mine. Unless... My heart started to pound. As soon as I hung up, I relayed the conversation to Sarah. A slow, predatory smile spread across her face. Well, she said, her eyes gleaming. "Let's see what the public record has to say about that." She turned to her computer, her fingers flying across the keyboard. She navigated to the Clatsop County Public Records Database, a tool available to anyone but powerful in the hands of someone who knew what to look for. She typed in my parents' names and their address in Ohio. "Property records are a beautiful thing, Glory," she murmured, her eyes scanning the screen. "They don't lie." She clicked a few links, pulling up deeds of trust and mortgage documents. She went silent for a full minute, her focus absolute. Then she leaned back in her chair and let out a low whistle. "Oh, you have got to be kidding me," she said, shaking her head in disbelief. She turned the monitor towards me. My eyes struggled to make sense of the legal jargon, but the numbers were brutally clear. My parents had refinanced their home, not once, not twice, but 3 times in the last 5 years. The most recent loan had been taken out just 6 months ago. The amount of debt they had leveraged against their property was staggering. It was a hole so deep they could never hope to climb out of it. "This was never about getting a house for Kyle," Sarah said, her voice electric with the thrill of discovery. "This was about getting their hands on a new asset, your house, to use as collateral to stop their own from being foreclosed on. They weren't trying to build Kyle a future. They were trying to patch the holes in their own sinking ship, a ship he likely sank with his gambling debts." She stood up and began to print the documents, the printer whirring to life, spitting out page after page of our secret weapon. This was it, the motive, the undeniable black and white proof that their entire case was built on a mountain of lies. With the stack of freshly printed evidence in her hand, Sarah sat down at her desk. She began to type, drafting a new letter. It wasn't a letter of negotiation or a request for mediation. It was a formal notification, a summons to appear for a court hearing. She finished typing and swiveled in her chair to face me, a look of cold, hard confidence on her face. "Glory," she said, her voice ringing with the finality of a judge's gavel. "They wanted a fight. We're going to give them one. But what they don't know is that we're walking into that courtroom already knowing we've won." The Clatsop County Courthouse was an old, imposing building, the kind where the air itself feels heavy with the weight of past judgments. The courtroom was paneled in dark wood, smelling faintly of old paper and floor polish. It was a solemn, intimidating space, designed to make you feel small. As I sat beside Sarah at the defendant's table, I could feel my family's eyes on me from across the room. My father's gaze was hard and accusing. My mother's was a mask of wounded sorrow. Kyle just stared at his hands. I met none of their gazes. My eyes were fixed on the judge's bench, my posture as rigid and disciplined as it was during a formal inspection. I was a ship in a storm, holding my position, waiting for the signal. Their lawyer, a slick man named Gregory Ford, with an overconfident smile, presented their case first. He painted a masterful picture of a loving, hardworking family and their dutiful, successful daughter. He spoke of my promise to always take care of my family, of my obligation as the one who had made it out. It was a beautiful, compelling work of fiction. Then he called Kyle to the stand. My brother, looking younger than his 29 years, played the part of the tragic victim perfectly. He spoke in a soft, halting voice about his struggles, his dreams, and how his big sister, his hero, had always sworn she would provide a stable home for him. He looked at me with sad, puppy dog eyes, a look that had worked on me 1,000 times before. Today it felt like looking at a stranger. I remained perfectly still, my expression unreadable. When it was Sarah's turn, she rose with a quiet confidence that seemed to suck the air out of the room. She didn't pace or posture. She walked directly to the witness stand where my father was now seated. "Mr. Hatch," she began, her voice calm and conversational, "you've testified that your sole motivation in this matter is to provide a stable home for your son, Kyle. Is that correct?" "That's right," my father said, his voice firm. "A promise is a promise." "A noble goal," Sarah said smoothly. "Tell me, Mr. Hatch, Are you currently experiencing any financial difficulties of your own? A flicker of irritation crossed my father's face. My finances are my own business. They have nothing to do with this. I believe they have everything to do with this, Sarah countered, turning to the judge. Your Honor, I would like to submit into evidence the certified property records for the plaintiff's primary residence in Ohio. She placed the thick stack of papers, our secret weapon, on the clerk's desk. The room was silent as the judge, a stern, no-nonsense woman in her 60s, reviewed the first page. My father's confident demeanor began to crumble, the color draining from his face. He knew what those papers said. Sarah didn't wait. She turned her attention back to my father. These records show, Mr. Hatch, that you have refinanced your home 3 times in the last 5 years, extracting a significant amount of equity. Is that correct? My father sputtered. That's a private matter. Is it? Sarah pressed, her voice hardening. Or is it the real reason we're all here today? She let the question hang in the air before dismissing him and calling her next witness. The defense calls Kyle Hatch to the stand. My brother walked back to the witness box, his earlier confidence gone, replaced by a nervous sweat on his brow. Sarah approached him, her expression deceptively gentle. Mr. Hatch, you testified that you need this house for stability. Are there any other reasons your parents are so desperate to secure a new property? No, Kyle said, his voice barely a whisper. Are you sure? Sarah asked. Mr. Hatch, do you have a gambling problem? Kyle's face went white. No, I don't know what you're talking about. You don't? Sarah's voice was laced with steel. She turned again to the judge. Your Honor, the defense has subpoenaed records from multiple online gaming sites showing that over the past 12 months, Mr. Kyle Hatch has accrued losses in excess of 6 figures. A collective gasp went through the courtroom. My mother let out a small choked sob. My father looked like he had been physically struck, his face a mask of gray disbelief. Sarah wasn't finished. She delivered the final devastating blow. And, Your Honor, it is a remarkable coincidence that the amount of Mr. Hatch's gambling losses aligns almost perfectly with the amount of debt his parents have taken on by refinancing their own home, the home that is now, I suspect, on the verge of foreclosure. The entire sordid scheme lay exposed under the harsh lights of the courtroom. It was a house of cards, and Sarah had just blown it down. The collapse was total and immediate. My father buried his face in his hands. My mother's performative tears turned into ugly, racking sobs of humiliation. Kyle, under the piercing gaze of the judge, finally broke. He admitted everything, the debts, the lies, the pressure from his parents, to secure my house as a last-ditch effort to save themselves. The judge looked down from her bench, her face a study in undisguised contempt. She addressed my family, her voice ringing with authority. This court finds the plaintiff's case to be not only without merit, but a grotesque abuse of the legal process, she declared. Case dismissed. Furthermore, this court orders the plaintiffs, Robert and Nancy Hatch, to pay for all of the defendant's legal fees. It was over. Sarah gave my arm a gentle squeeze. I stood up, my legs feeling surprisingly steady. As we walked towards the exit, I did not look back at the wreckage of my family. I didn't need to. I pushed open the heavy courtroom doors and stepped out into the hallway, and then out of the courthouse itself. The Oregon sky, which had been gray and overcast all morning, had broken open. A brilliant, clean blue sky stretched out above me. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the cool, fresh air. The weight of a lifetime, The anchor of their expectations and disappointments had finally been cut loose. I was free. I drove back to my house, the words now a settled truth, not a desperate claim. Under that clear blue Astoria sky, the victory in the courtroom had been absolute, a clean, decisive severing. I had expected to feel a surge of elation, a triumphant joy. But as I unlocked my own front door and stepped into the quiet space, the adrenaline of the fight drained away, leaving behind something I hadn't anticipated. A vast, hollow emptiness. The battle was won, but the war had left its casualties. I had lost my family. I sat on the steps of my small porch, looking out at the calm, steady flow of the Columbia River. There was no elation, only a profound exhaustion that seemed to settle deep in my bones. It was a strange cocktail of emotions, a dizzying mix of relief and grief. I was relieved that the lies had been exposed, that the manipulation had ended, but I was grieving the family I once thought I had, the love I had so desperately wanted to be real. I had won my house, my freedom, my future. But in doing so, I had to officially acknowledge that the family I grew up with was gone forever, if it had ever truly existed at all. Then the aftershocks began. My phone, which had been blessedly silent, started to buzz. A voicemail from my mother, her voice thick with a new kind of tears. The desperate, panicked tears of someone who has lost control. An email from my father, not apologizing, but attempting to justify his actions, with a long, rambling narrative of his own burdens. Text after text from Kyle, a confusing mix of blame and half-hearted apologies. In the past, this barrage would have been my call to action. I would have been the first responder, rushing in to manage their emotions, to soothe their self-inflicted wounds. But I just stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the notifications. My therapist, Dr. Ramirez, whom I had started seeing after the first week of this crisis, had given me a mantra. Silence is not a punishment, it is a boundary. She had helped me understand that their chaos was not mine to contain. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me, that if I opened that door even a crack, the old toxic cycle would begin anew. So I deleted the voicemails without listening. I archived the emails without reading. I swiped away the text notifications one by one until my screen was clear. A week later, a check arrived in the mail. It was from my father's bank account for the exact amount of Sarah's legal fees. There was no note, just the cold, impersonal document. A final court-ordered transaction. I put it in a new envelope and mailed it to Sarah's office without adding a single word of my own. Then I did the hardest thing yet. I opened my phone's contact list. I found my father's name, my mother's, my brother's. My finger hesitated for a long moment over the screen. This felt so final, so brutal. But it wasn't an act of anger. It was an act of peace. It was the serenity prayer in practice, granting myself the serenity to accept the things I could not change, them. It was the courage to change the things I could, my own peace of mind. And it was the wisdom to finally know the difference. I pressed block contact on all three. That night, I sat at my new kitchen table, the one I had picked out myself, and wrote one last letter. This one was not for them. It was for me. I poured everything out onto the pages, the deep, aching hurt of the little girl on the graduation stage, the cold fury of the woman in the courtroom, the confusion, the anger, and even, to my own surprise, the love that had once been there. I wrote about the good memories, too, the rare moments of sunshine, acknowledging that they were part of the story, the part that made the betrayal so much more painful. I wrote that I forgave them, not because they deserved it, not because their actions were excusable, but because I deserved to be free. I was forgiving them to release myself from the heavy anchor of my own resentment. I was letting go of the hope that they would ever be the family I needed, so I could finally be the person I needed. When I had written the last word, I folded the pages and carried them outside into the cool, damp night air. In a small ceramic fireproof bowl on my back patio, I lit a match. I held the flame to the corner of the letter. I watched as the fire consumed the paper, turning the ink of my pain into smoke and ash. The words curled, blackened, and disappeared, rising into the vast, starry Oregon sky. And as the last ember faded into the darkness, I felt a true and final release. The war was over. The aftershocks had ceased. The silence that remained was no longer empty. It was peace. A year passed. The seasons in Astoria turned, bringing the soft gray rains of winter, the vibrant burst of spring, and now the long golden days of summer. My little house, once a battleground, had become a sanctuary. The silence that once felt like a hollow emptiness was now filled with the sounds of life. The biggest source of that life was a scruffy, one-eyed terrier mix I'd adopted from the local animal shelter. I named him Chance. We had found each other, two survivors in need of a second one. He now spent his days chasing butterflies in the yard, his tail a blur of joyous energy. My garden, the one I had dreamed of, was thriving. The Oregon rhododendrons I had planted by the window were a riot of brilliant pink and purple, their resilience a quiet testament to the power of putting down roots. My home had also become a hub for my chosen family. Most weekends, Maria and a few other friends from the Coast Guard would come over for barbecues on the back patio. We'd grill salmon, drink cold beer, and fill the house with easy laughter. They were my anchors, the steady, reliable presence that had held me fast through the storm. They never asked about my biological family, and I never offered. They simply accepted the person I was now, the person I was becoming. I did hear news, though, in small, filtered doses from my cousin, Amy. My parents had sold the house in Ohio to pay off the mountain of debt Kyle had created. They were living in a small apartment now. Kyle, she said, had gone through a court-ordered rehab program and was working as a mechanic at a local garage. I listened to this news with a strange sense of detachment, like hearing about the fate of characters in a book I'd finished long ago. There was no joy in their downfall, but there was no sorrow either, just a quiet acceptance. One day, an unstamped postcard appeared in my mailbox. There was no return address. On the back, in my mother's familiar handwriting, were just 3 words: "We are sorry." I held the card for a long time, then placed it in a drawer without ceremony. It was a period at the end of a sentence, not an ellipsis inviting a response. My life was moving forward. I had been promoted at work, and with the promotion came a new role, training instructor for the new recruits. I found a surprising passion for it, sharing my experience, not just of navigating treacherous seas, but of navigating the storms within. I taught them about discipline, about teamwork, and about the kind of resilience that isn't just about being tough, but about knowing when to be vulnerable and ask for help. It was at a meet and greet for the new recruits' families that I met Daniel. He was a local high school history teacher, the uncle of one of my trainees. He had a kind, easy smile and eyes that held a gentle intelligence. We started talking, first about his nephew, then about Astoria's history, then about everything else. We went for coffee, then dinner. He was fascinated by my life in the Coast Guard. and I was fascinated by his passion for the past. He wasn't intimidated by my strength or my independence. In fact, he seemed to cherish it. He loved the story of my house, of my fight. He saw the scars from my past not as damage, but as part of who I was. There's a Japanese art form called kintsugi, where they repair broken pottery with gold lacquer. The philosophy is that the piece is more beautiful for having been broken. With Daniel, for the first time, I felt like my own cracks were filled with gold. The story ends here, on a warm summer evening, much like this one. Daniel and I are sitting on my porch steps, drinking iced tea. The sun is setting over the Columbia River, painting the sky in shades of orange and deep purple. Chance is asleep at our feet, his one good eye twitching as he dreams of chasing squirrels. Daniel took my hand, his thumb gently tracing the calluses on my palm. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked softly. "Everything that happened?" I followed his gaze to my house, now glowing in the twilight. I looked at my garden, a testament to new life. I looked at the man beside me, a symbol of unexpected love. And I looked at the sleeping dog at my feet, a reminder of second chances. I thought about the storm, the betrayal, the fight, and I felt a wave of profound, unshakable peace. "I didn't choose the storm," I said, my voice quiet but clear. "But I chose to become the anchor, and in the end, the anchor found its harbor." My story began in a storm, but it ended in a quiet harbor I built with my own two hands. Sharing it has been part of my healing, a way to turn my scars into a map for others. I know I'm not the only one who has had to become their own anchor in a turbulent sea. If my journey resonated with you, I invite you to join our community. There are countless stories of resilience waiting to be told. Subscribe to our channel so you never miss a story of strength and survival.